So we're looking at the reliquary shrine of St Amandus in the Walters Museum of Art, which was made sometime between 1250 and 1275 in Flanders, western Belgium. Now at first glance, we notice the materials that it's made out of: gilt copper and silver with rock crystals, semi-precious stones, and enamel, all over a wooden base. The piece is very elegant and has a certain majesty about it, and immediately we notice its obvious Christian themes and its resemblance to an actual church. Now, knowing it's a reliquary, we can conclude that it once held the relics of an important Christian figure, and that is St. Amandus.
That's exactly right. So Saint Amandus was a 7th century Flemish saint, and this reliquary houses his remains. It is a 3D box kind of shape that's really shaped almost like a building in composition, either as a house or a church perhaps. It has four walls, so to speak, that are sitting on a pedestal or stylobate sort of structure. It has a pointed roof and arches and columns that flank all four sides of the reliquary. On one end, there is a high relief sculpture, a fairly large sculpture of a man, a male figure, presumably Saint Amandus. He has rich clothing with a crown adorned with precious stones, which really gives him a majestic sort of air. On the two longer walls, we have six panels on each side that are framed by arches. Each one displays a portrait of a male figure. So judging by the number that there are, 12 in total, we can assume that by the number and the attributes that these figures have, that they are probably representations of the 12 apostles. On the roof, there are also panels, four in total, two on each side, that display scenes of the evangelists, the four evangelists at work writing the Gospels. And throughout the whole reliquary, in all the spots where there aren't portrayals of human figures, it is very, very highly decorated, adorned with all kinds of patterns, organic relief patterns and motifs, and there are precious stones added to really give it a very enhanced characteristic. There's not a single blank space on the whole thing, except for a few areas where some panels are missing.
That's right. Now, this piece was taken from the monastery at El Non near Tournai, where it would have been placed behind the altar, supported by columns, so that it was a central focus point of the church and could be venerated by Christians on pilgrimage year-round. Now, as a central focus point of the church, and because of its 360 degrees design, we can imagine pilgrims arriving at the church and immediately being drawn to it and crowding around it to get a good view of St. Amandus' reliquary, who, by the way, was the patron saint of brewers, winemakers, and merchants, certainly adding to his popularity as a saint of the people. Now, because no artist is associated with the piece, we can assume that monks at the El Non monastery were the ones who made it. And comparing it to other reliquaries we have seen, it is rather large. And considering how ornate it is, it must have taken some time to complete, showing the mastery of the monks.
Definitely. I think the rich texture of the reliquary also really shows the artistic mastery of the monks. It is filled with relief throughout, golden relief, so it really has a very rich texture with ridges everywhere that definitely give it a sense of depth and beauty. As we've mentioned before, it's gilded in gold throughout. It's very shiny and lavish, and we can imagine that it was probably even shinier a long time ago, that it's probably lost some of its luster over time. Also, its three-dimensionality really adds to its rich detail and beauty. I think that it's a very harmonious construction, the actual architecture, so to speak, of the reliquary. As I've said before, there are four walls with the same number of arches and columns on each side, the same number of panels on each side. So in this sense, it's a very balanced and symmetrical sort of piece. But if we look at each individual portrait of the characters, they're all different. So that definitely adds a sense of diversity and complexity to the reliquary. So looking at these figures, we can see that there's definitely a very distinctly Gothic look, and we can tell that the emphasis in general on this reliquary is placed on the richness and heavenly aura of its appeal, and not so much on accurate depiction of the human form or trying to create ideal beauty. So as I've mentioned before, there's just a lavish sense of decor everywhere, organic shapes and patterns, very fluid, that gives the piece a very surreal and heavenly, idealized sort of feel. But if we look at the figures themselves, we see that they are very simple. They have basic features, elongated features, not very realistic proportions, very little sense of depth or natural movement or anatomy for that matter. There's no real sense of space, or there's no background context that they're located in. They all have very long and flowing garments that really disguise any sense of anatomy, or their bodies for that matter. So again, that really shows this emphasis not so much on the human body, but on the richness and lavishness of the reliquary itself. And the materials that were used, the stones, the gold, I think were really meant to honor God and St. Amandus, and to show a sense of piety. And we have on the reliquary depictions of some of the most important figures in Christianity, the 12 apostles, the 4 evangelists, kind of symbolically putting St. Amandus on the same playing field as these figures and showing his importance.